Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, my name is Angel, and today I am sharing some high-end inspired DIYs. This first project is inspired by these distressed finial bookends from Antique Farmhouse. Now, I did not have any finials, but I was able to pick up some of these wood candlesticks from my local thrift store, and I thought these would be perfect if I cut the tops off. So I just used my miter box saw and cut these right where that little curve is. And once I had them cut down, I just gave each of these a really light sanding. Now, I definitely wanted to do the crackle finish on these to give them the distressed look. So for the undercoating of paint, I'm using an apple barrel color called Nutmeg, and I'm gonna do 3 coats of that on these because apple barrel paint is like super thin. So I did end up having to do about 3 coats, I think. Now, as always, to get that crackle finish and the distressed look, I'm using some regular white school glue. This is my favorite technique to get a crackle finish. And I did go in and do it pretty thick on these because I wanted it to have really big cracks. Now, I do let my glue dry until it is a little bit tacky. If you rub it with your brush, you can see that it's kind of drying, and then you know that it's ready to add your white chalk paint over top of this. And whenever I do a crackle finish, I do go in with a really heavy coat of my white chalk paint, and then of course you can use a blow dryer to dry this quicker and get those cracks quicker, but you can also just let this air dry and it's going to give you the same effect. For these, I just let them air dry. Now, this next project is actually inspired by these antique curtain ties that I found on Amazon. These are actually $25 a piece, so I wanted to make my own. I found this cute little picture frame at my local thrift store, but of course there was only one, and I actually have 4 curtains that I want to use this on. So I pulled out some of my air dry clay, and I'm actually just going to use my picture frame to make some impressions into the clay. I wanted these to be a little thicker than I actually usually do. So I grabbed a piece about the size of my palm, and I'm just gonna roll that out to about 1/2 inch thick. Once I have it all rolled out, I took the picture frame and pressed it face down into the clay, and I did roll it just very gently, and then I just made sure that I pressed down all the edges so that the impression would go into the clay. Then I just used a little razor to cut out my frames. Now, obviously, because I am cutting these out myself, they're not going to be exactly perfect or matchy-matchy, but that's okay. They were very similar and still look great together. Once I got it all cut out, I went around the edges and just kind of pressed it and rubbed it to smooth all of those edges. And finally, I cut out the little centerpiece of the clay. Then I went ahead and just made 3 more of these and set them aside for 24 hours so that they could dry. Now, another option for these would be to get the little frames from Dollar Tree or the mirrors and just pop the mirrors out to make these. Once they were all dry the next day, I just used some of my European gold rub and buff and went over all 4 of my frames. For the little wood pieces that are going to hold the curtain, I'm just using 2 of Dollar Tree's dowel rods, and I'm going to cut both of these in half. Then once again, I'm just using some of my rub and buff to paint these so that they match my frames. This next project is inspired by these French Traditions book box set from Antique Farmhouse. I love decorative books, and of course I had these left over from a project I did at Christmas. I actually used one to make a book clock in my last video, and I still had these, so I figured they would be perfect for some decorative boxes. Now, originally, my plan was to use these wooden rulers from Dollar Tree, but I didn't pick up enough, so I had to use some of my paint stir sticks that I had left over from the book clock. But I'll also be using some of this faux leather from Dollar Tree. Now, if I would have had white, that would have been so much easier, but I didn't. I just had the brown color, so I just worked with what I had. Now, I started out ripping out the excess pages that were still in my books. My plan was to paint my books first, cover the inside, and then make my boxes. But I actually got really far ahead of myself for some reason, and I started measuring out the little rulers and my paint stir sticks so that I could make the book boxes, and I cut those down with my miter box saw. And instead of setting these aside to finish my books, I actually just went ahead and built my boxes. Again, this would have been so much easier had I painted my books and covered the inside first. So that being said, here I am building my boxes. I'm using some of my Gorilla Glue hot glue sticks to build my boxes, and as you can see, I'm only gluing it to one side so that it'll still be able to open, just like I did my book clock in the last video. But once I have all of this glued together, I'm going to finish my second box with those paint stir sticks. Now, backtracking to what I should have done first, I'm going to cut down a piece of this Dollar Tree faux leather, and I'm going to cover the binding of the book with it because these books did have impressions of the titles, and I just wanted to cover those up. So once I had my first piece cut down, I just used that to cut the second piece because these books were about the same size. To attach this leather to my books, I'm using some Aleene's Fabric Fusion. I get this at Walmart and I absolutely love it. It dries pretty fast and it's really easy to work with and it holds really well. So I just did the front first and then I worked my way around the books. I did end up letting this dry for probably about an hour or two, and then I went back in with some of my white chalk paint, and I believe it took 3, maybe 4 coats of the chalk paint to paint these. Now, because I did mess up and put the boxes in the books before I painted them, I did end up having to paint everything so that it would look cohesive and nice. So I had to go back in and use some painter's tape to tape these off so that I could paint the wood part that I made the boxes with some of my folk art antique gold paint. And once I had all the wood pieces painted, I'm going to go in on the binding of the book to do a little design using these Dollar Tree stencils. And again, I just used my folk art antique gold paint for this. Now, even though I messed up at the very beginning and I should have covered the inside of the book, I did still want to try to cover it to make it look a little neater. So I'm using some of this black felt that I got from Amazon. I cut those pieces down, put a piece at the front, and then I just tried to fit a piece inside the box. This next project is again from Antique Farmhouse. I found this embossed floral wall decor, and I picked up this frame and this art piece from my thrift store. I'm not going to ruin the painting, but I am going to flip this over and use the backside of it. So I painted this backside and the frame with a few coats of my white chalk paint. Now, once they were both dry, to do the embossing, I'm using this really pretty floral stencil that I got from Amazon. This was actually a pack of a few of these floral stencils, and I'm just going to use some painter's tape to tape this down. And as I'm sure you can guess, I'm going to be using some Dollar Tree spackling for this project. Now, I do add a few drops of water to my spackling to make it more into a paste. And whenever I do this, my kind of rule of thumb is to cover the stencil completely. So you want it to be thick enough that you don't see the stencil underneath this. And that's how you're going to get that really nice thick texture. Then once I had it all spread onto the stencil, I was able to just remove the painter's tape and peel this back. And as you can see, it is very detailed and super textured. Now right here, I am just scraping off that spackling where the stems were because I want to create a vase on here. So I did use the frame to determine where the edge was going to be. Then I just added a piece of painter's tape, and I'm going to use some more of that spackling to make a vase. And this was super easy to just freehand. Don't worry if you mess up, you can always scrape off some of this spackling. Once I was happy with my vase at the very end, just to make those lines a little more crisp on this vase, I'm just using the edge of my spatula to scrape off some of the spackling and then smooth it out a little bit. And finally, for this project, once the spackling had dried completely, I went back in with some of my European Rub and Buff over all of the little details. This final project is inspired by this beautiful floral picture from Anthropologie. So I just picked up this picture from my local thrift store, and the first thing I'm going to do to this is just go in with a really light coat of my white chalk paint. This is going to give it a nice base, and then for the next two coats, I'm going to mix in some baking soda with my white chalk paint. And like I said, I'm going to just do 2 more coats on this, and it will cover really nicely. Since the Anthropologie one had those beautiful raised flowers, I'm going to be using this mold that I got from Amazon and some of my air dry clay. Now this is a really deep mold, and I find it really helpful if you're using a deep mold to just use your rolling pin to press this down into the mold. And then as always, when I'm using a mold, I just use my fingers to kind of pull back the excess clay. Now I did have someone ask me a few videos back if I prep my molds, and I don't. These molds from Amazon are really amazing. I've never had to prep any of them. And as always, I do have all of my molds and everything I use in my videos linked below for you if you are interested. So for this vase, I did end up making 2 of the flower molds, and then I made a few of the leaf molds, but I do break those in pieces. You can see here, I'm just using some gel super glue to attach all of these before they dry so that I can shape them and put them where I want them. And if you ever have an issue of your clay cracking as it starts to dry, all you have to do is put a little bit of water on your finger and rub over where it is cracking. But finally, for this project, I just went back in with some of my white chalk paint and painted over all of my clay pieces so that it would match my vase. And that is going to be it for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed these high-end inspired DIYs. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time.